alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And hey, y'all, my name is Savannah Willis, and welcome to today's educational webinar hosted by the International Museum of Muslim Cultures in partnership with the Muslim Mix. Today, we're celebrating the kickoff of the International Museum of Muslim Cultures annual Islamic Heritage Month. Be sure to head over to www.muslimmuseum.org for a full schedule of educational and entertaining virtual programming. To begin this festive month, the International Museum of Muslim Cultures and the Muslim Mix are proud to introduce a collaborative effort, the Era of Woman, a movement discovering, highlighting, and utilizing the voices of African American Muslim women to push forward the current worldwide freedom struggle. Era of Woman seeks to combine the knowledge and wisdom of the African-American civil rights struggle, the African-American Muslim fight for inner dignity, and all the human struggles that came after, connecting them through the focus of motherhood leadership as one freedom struggle. Sparked by George Floyd's primal cry for his mother, EOW endeavors to work for the advancement, preparation, and protection of the African American community through the leadership of African American Muslim women working in partnership with all. To see how you can be a part of this new era, stay tuned till the end of our programming for more information, and also check out EOW's website at www.eraofwoman.com. Now, to learn a little bit more about the conversation that we'll be having today, I turn it over to Muslim Mix founder and also founder of EOW, Asila Rashid.
Thank you, Savannah. Hi, my name is Asila Rashid. I am the co-founder of the Muslim Mix and now co-chair of the Era of Woman. I'm so happy to be joining all of you all today on this wonderful and just exciting program as we, the Era of the Woman, women are sitting at the feet of really these illustrious pioneering activist women, Okolo Rashid, co-founder and president of the International Museum of Muslim Cultures, and Sister Aisha K. Mustafa, who is a professor as well as editor of the Muslim Journal. And also joining me, as we've already just heard from Savannah, who is a poetess, a writer, an author. And I have also, you'll hear from in just a second, Tiffany Green Abdullah, who is an award-winning speaker, as well as a learning and design innovator. So already, as you can see, just from this setup of these amazing women, we're hopefully in for a great conversation. And so this conversation is really, coming in as we are concluding Women's History Month, which focuses on those highlights and contributions of women through history and art and society and culture and all of that good stuff, as well as we seek to really observe, continue the study and celebration of women who are doing amazing things, who have done amazing things in the past and who are doing amazing things today. And particularly, we are echoing African American History Month that just ended last month, and specifically for this program, focusing in on African American Muslim women, definitely a group that we don't often maybe hear about and hear from and hear that history there, as well as hearing what's going on, today and what works are being put forth today. So that pretty much wraps up what we are going to be getting into today. Like I said, this is really an intergenerational conversation as we embark upon Era of a Woman and really focusing on cultivating leadership, as well as learning from those leaders who have already trailblazed for us, who are featured on here today. So without further ado, let's get into it. Tiffany.
All right, thank you, Asila. So this is sort of a question answer period, but before we jump into that, I wanted to read a little excerpt from Sister Okolo's concept paper that Asila shared with me, I think it was back in July of 2020 now, as Sister Okolo was sort of contemplating everything that happened with George Floyd and the protest movement that started. And Asila and I were having sort of a parallel conversation about what do we do? Like, we have little children. We don't necessarily feel, safe being out in the streets protesting. By the time this airs, the Derek Chauvin murder trial will be underway, inshallah. They've selected the jury, as I understand it. So I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs from her paper that really kind of summarizes where we were. And this paper really helped inspire the direction that we're in right now. 6 or 7 months later. So she says, in particular, the way George Floyd is murdered, as we look on in horror with former Officer Derek Chauvin's knee pinned against his neck as Floyd laid on the pavement, handcuffed, pleading, "Please, I can't breathe. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. My everything hurts." And that primal scream, "Mama, mama." This shocked the sensibilities and awakened the conscience, i.e. the sense of inner dignity and self-determination, what it means to be human within people looking on. Specifically, that primal scream or outcry for his mother at that sudden anticipation of death under extreme abuse, agony, and physical and mental suffering, where he was out of his depth, signaled something deep within the human soul, i.e. it stirred the human spirit. I also see this as a call for motherhood leadership, for those sentiments, sensitivities, and values of mother to lead. I know I felt it, and others have expressed a similar feeling. Also, in my opinion, this is what has catalyzed the protest and movement for dignity and justice across this country and the globe. And I thought that really it was just time to sort of hear that again, say that again, for all of us, because it's been, almost a year, 9 months. And as his trial is kicking off, there's lots of banter about, is he going to be convicted? Is he not? But it just reminds us again why we're here, what we're doing here with Arab Woman, and why we're beginning to have these conversations and have them publicly, because typically women in Islam have often been in the background, doing a lot of work, but still in the background. And so, we will kick off, I guess, the first question. Savannah, I think you're gonna do that one.
Yes, and I think that, what you just said ties perfectly into it. I was one of those people that felt like, okay, I want to get out and march, because I hadn't before. I had never, exercised my civic right to get out and march that way, even though George Floyd was not the first incident that we saw. But in doing that, I felt that there was a lot of anger, and there was this tension that was very away from the feminine sort of power that I know and understand. And it was actually like a complete opposite of that, sort of driving this fight. So what I really want to ask to you all, because I wasn't seeing myself represented in what I was seeing outside. So what was and still is significant and important about women's early role in Islam in America that we need to take into this movement? Sister Okolo, if you want to start us off.
Assalamu alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is a very powerful movement that, I'm really just excited and very pleased to be a part of it, to be working with these 3 dynamic young African-American Muslim women, but Muslim women and women, period, right? So I think to address the question, I would have to say that we have to put it into a certain context, because we're talking about, you asked about, the Muslims of early Islam, right? What would they, what are they bringing? What is, what's the difference? And I like the fact of what you said, Savannah, that when you were looking out, in the streets and looking at the movement, it moved all of us. All of us was moved because we were all affected, as Tiffany said when she read those words. But there are different ways to approach the problem. And I think I would have to say that that movement, or this movement, this moment that we're experiencing right now, it is not an isolated moment. And I know people are tying it to just the civil rights movement, and this is kind of like a continuation of that. But I want to say that it is more than just a civil rights movement. I would like to approach the question by just making an observation. Imam Warthaddin Muhammad, who is the transformative leader of the African American Muslim movement and a reformer for the Nation of Islam, he made an interesting observation after coming into the public eye, after taking over the leadership of the Nation of Islam. He said that during the 60s, when the civil rights movement was like at its peak, and the freedom movement overall, it was at its peak, that we as a people, the African American people who were fighting for racial dignity and freedom, justice, and equality, we lost that as a people, that it was undermined. He talks about because of the corrupt society and a corrupt government, right? He said that, in fact, he didn't use the word COINTELPRO, but the fact is that when you're talking about a corrupt government, we are talking about, we had within our American government an organization, the FBI, that established a program, a conspiracy program to disrupt and to destroy the freedom movement, not just the civil rights movement, because it was against the freedom movement in general, right? And so he said, but there are two men that best represented the extreme pose of what we wanted in this country. It was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who represented the inner dignity that manifested itself in self-determination, nationalism, and separatism. And Dr. Martin Luther King, at the external conference, Imam Muhammad called it, but we're talking about civil rights, who was fighting for civil rights. And we're saying, he used the Honorable Elijah, he used Dr. King because Dr. King best represented an example of the most influential person within the civil rights movement. But of those two, the idea was that our movement, they both represented one freedom struggle. The civil rights movement and the African American Muslim movement represented one freedom struggle, but it was the plan of the COINTELPRO, counterintelligence agent, to disrupt and destroy and to discredit the African American Muslim movement and to put it isolated. And so they embraced the civil rights movement, but they left out the other components. So to address this issue about what African American Muslim women represented, most people don't know. And I want to let Aisha really talk more about this person, but I do want to introduce her, right? Is that the Nation of Islam and that African American Muslim movement that represented that inner dignity, that really is what what Tiffany talked about in terms of what happened when we saw the George Floyd horrific murder, the consciousness, the inner dignity, that inner nature of a sense of what it means to be human. To sniff out the life of a person. It's not just about the physical life, right? And so we have to have those certain kinds of sensitivities. And there is this woman that most people don't know about that really is a co-founder of the Nation of Islam. So she brought in those women's sentiments, and that's Sister Clara Muhammad. And so I would like to really shift it over to Aisha, because she really was a part. She's a real pioneer. I came in later than Aisha, but she's the real pioneer that can really give you a sense of what that role of motherhood leadership that Sister Clara Muhammad represented. And you can't, I'm going to make this last point. You cannot, the whole idea of motherhood leadership is that if you're trying to, if you got corruption in the society like we had, if you got destruction into society, you're gonna have to bring in the motherhood sentiments, because that's what motherhood leadership is all about. You've got to bring back that nature that creates, that nurtures, that evolves. And that's what God created us for as women. And that's really our nature. But I'd like to pitch it over to Sister Aisha to talk about the important role that woman leadership played in the Nation of Islam through Sister Clara Muhammad and other women.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you, Sister Okola, and thank all of you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And in terms of the woman's role, Sister Clara is where I want to end, but as Muslim women, I think we need to make sure we bring all of that Muslim history with us, because it is potent. It is potent for women, and it gives us a foundation that carries us much, much further into our duties as well as our aspirations. So for me, you know, of course, we can go back to Eve, right? And one thing Imam Muhammad explained to us, and you know, in bringing Urshan and his leadership as the transitioner of the Nation of Islam, he brought all these women back into play that, you know, first clarify our own position as women. We're not Jezebels, and we are not the fall of man. We are not woe unto man. He said, you are the womb of mine. And then he brought that up from clarifying and cleansing the history actually of Eve in terms of her role in humankind coming forth. And then we come forward in the next stop in that lineage of women, Muslim women. We came to Hagar, and you know, Hagar was called a concubine and the troublemaker also. And she had all these disparaging descriptions heaped on her. But in clarification through Imam Muhammad's leadership and transitioning the Nation of Islam, so remember, Hagar is actually the mother of Mecca. There would be no Mecca without Hagar. And then just look at the saga of her own life, the strength that she had to have, the fortitude, and how even in her darkest hours, she was directed. She was being guided by God, as well as her husband, Abraham, because with a small child, she was put out of his home into a desert land. And the only thing she could say to Abraham is this what your God tells you to do? And he says, yes. And then her response is, well, your God will provide for me. And in her own presence, her own solitude in that desert with nothing but an infant child, she's searching for water to drink herself so that she can make more breast milk, but as well as something for her child. And she comes to the resolve that there's nothing there. And that's when God responds to her needs. And then you come forward in the Quran and in the life of the Prophet himself that we fashion our whole community on, Prophet Muhammad. The first convert to Al-Islam was a woman, was Khadijah, who was the employer of Muhammad, who became the prophet. She was his consoling person. She was the one who directed him to get further information and knowledge in terms of what he was experiencing when he first came into prophethood. And that was Khadijah, the woman who employed men. She inherited her wealth. She was a wealthy woman, and she gave all of those resources behind good leadership, Prophet Muhammad. And then as the Quran further ushers in, we have to remember that the women of the Quran are the women of the history of Al-Islam. And in the Quran, there are two prominent women that stand out. One is Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, and that's the only chapter in the Quran named after a woman specifically, is the chapter named Mary. And then when you go back and you talk about Mary, then you have to go back to her mother, Mary's mother, who prayed for a child who could help bring forth God's community. And she was expecting a son. And when she was born, daughter was born, she was taken aback. The mother was taken aback because she didn't know a man carrying out that role. But the angels told her, nevertheless, Allah knew what you were carrying, and therefore Mary has that ushering forth of that role of women. The other woman mentioned in the Quran, not specifically the name of a chapter, but she is the Hasidic, Sheba. Saba is the city of whom we know as Queen Sheba, Yemen, the Yemen people. And it narrates how she was the leader of a community who had to be come face to face with a great army that was the army of Solomon, and how she negotiated and how she confronted or faced that threat to her own community and dignity, and with belief in God bringing her forth. So all of these strong women are within our context of the religion, and we don't want to cut ourselves away from all of the strength. You know, energy travels throughout the universe, and we continue where it started, it continues to travel. And we are the farthest post out, and we are receiving that energy from all of these women. And of course, when we get into the Nation of Islam history, as Sister Okola referred to Sister Claire Muhammad as being the co-founder, it's because when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad himself was not yet aware of what his role would be in ushering forth the dignity of African American people, it was his wife Clara who introduced him to his teacher and said, this is a man that might be able to help you in restoring your male dignity. She was looking for something that helped restore the male dignity of her husband. And so they encountered Farad Muhammad, and Sister Clara introduced her husband Elijah to Farad. And in his role in building the Nation of Islam, we say Farad was the founder of the Nation of Islam. Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the builder of the Nation of Islam, and all those forces that came into play then, all those forces like Sister Okola was referencing in our own society to set back the advancement of the race, set back the advancement of the male dignity in our presence. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was arrested for evading the draft, even though he was past draft age. And when he was serving time in prison for something unjust, mainly just to get him out of the society, it was Sister Clara that carried on the works of the Nation of Islam in his absence while he was in prison. She would visit him, and she would bring back his directives to the community of the early community of the Nation of Islam and pass those directives on to the men. So she was the leader of the Nation of Islam in his absence, and she brought all of his directives back to that community. And we've had so many women, not only those women, but we acknowledge African American women in our history. We don't cut ourselves away from them, in that we change perhaps our faith. We're converts. You younger ones are born into the faith. Sister Okola and I are converts to the faith, but in our conversion, we don't dismiss the history and the resources and the contributions of those great African American women in our past. And here in Mississippi, of course, you know, at the top of the list is Fannie Lou Hamer, who just defied all odds, being beaten nearly within an inch of her life, coming off of a sharecropper's land to help lead the civil rights movement and the voters' rights, and even had the audacity to go to Washington, D.C. herself to be a part of the Democratic convention, when even the Democrats would not sit a delegate of African Americans. And as we think about George Floyd, you know, in our era, the awakening for our consciousness, and really the end of innocence for us was when Emmett Till was murdered, the young Emmett Till who was murdered. And it was his mother, Mamie Mosley Till, who had the audacity to bury her son in an open casket, even though she had been warned by the KKK and all those powers within the Southern hierarchy of white supremacy that she was not to open that casket, but she did. And at that time, Jet Magazine carried his funeral in that open casket on the cover of Jet Magazine for the world to see. And just like George Floyd was captured in that 8-minute video taken by a young lady, 16 years old, Emmett Till's picture on the front cover of the Jet Magazine, the world had to acknowledge that we see what is taking place in the South, and we can no longer brush it under the rug. We can no longer say that these kind of atrocities are not happening. Emmett Till was not the first murder of that nature, and Mamie Mosley Till was not the first mother to cry in that way, but it was the first one to be captured and taken worldwide on the cover of a national news magazine, just like George Floyd's capture in video took the message out to the world. And now you see George Floyd's picture, all of his Africanness, all of his features, distinctly African American. You don't have any speculation of who he belongs to. George Floyd's picture is hanging on the walls in Palestine. And the people, oppressed people everywhere, have begun to identify with George Floyd. And that's when we saw the streets fill up with all ethnicities, all races, saying this is wrong. And we can no longer sit back and be silent when this type of injustice is taking place in broad daylight, as if we were not going to respond. So I just want to say that we draw from all of that history and we are obligated to carry it forward.
Wow. I mean, thank you both for really just giving us a great overview and landscape across, even, pre-Islam history, of women, early history of women in Islam in America in the early history, as well as, of course, touching on and talking about women leadership within the faith, and talking about Sister Clara Muhammad, and also, bringing it to, as my mother, Sister Okola talked about, the One Freedom movement that it is. So by you bringing in also the other courageous Black women in, the civil rights movement and kicking off the civil rights movement as well, and that's, like you said, that strength and courage that it took then and that we're still walking in today. So, I mean, we could really do a whole program just on each of those individuals, but then also each of those themes and those time periods as well. So thank you so much for that. But then also, Sister Aisha, you really, in touching on even, Jet Magazine's coverage, right? That sometimes we may not think about. I mean, I think today, after seeing, George Floyd's murder and everything that kicked off last summer, and the usage of media, as a tool, but even in thinking back, to the start of the civil rights movement and things that kicked it off, the role that media also plays in that and can play in that type of fight for freedom and play in the movements. So I wanted to ask you, even as an editor of the Muslim Journal, which is, print media, really this, I'm asking you right now, Sister Aisha, but also this will be for my mother as well, being that you all both work in this area, in this field of preservation and telling the story, telling the history, as well as sharing, current and contemporary, news as well. Really wanted to talk about, what is the significance there? What has led you, really even to that work, and why is that work important, to you today? So we could start with you, Sister Aisha, since you already talked about and, brought in journalism, and that's the area in which you work in.
Praise be to Allah. Becoming a member of the transitioning Nation of Islam, I came in within what we call the cusp, when the transition was being made from the Nation of Islam leadership of the Elijah Muhammad onto the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad. But there was certain structures that were still in place at that time. For example, the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And Imam Muhammad was transitioning it as well as with the community, and it came through various names. The first was Muhammad Speaks newspaper, and then he used the name the Bilalian News, and then a couple other names until we resolved to be the Muslim Journal newspaper that we are today. But the voice of the leadership and the voice of the community and the will of the community is enhanced or heightened with a mechanism that carries that voice outside of the confines of the walls of the mosque, meeting halls, and carries it out further into the community. There are many people who say, I converted to Al-Islam because I was reading the newspaper, and I was reading the message of those leaders in that newspaper. There's a community in Bermuda that said it was the newspaper that came to the island, that circulated on the island, and we created a community around the newspaper, and we converted to Al-Islam. So the role of the journalist is so critical, and it can go so many different ways, until that's why we have to make sure we make every effort to have our own media and be in control of our own voice and be in control of our own presence. I hadn't planned to do this, but I want to show a book from one of my classes that I use. If I can just hold it up briefly, hopefully you'll be able to see it. Okay. This is The Race Beat. This book chronicles the history of journalism during the civil rights era from the early 40s. And it chronicles what the media was doing. The race beat being those people who are assigned to cover racial issues. And it shows the pros of the Black press trying to advance the civil rights movement and is pushing real hard, and other events that are taking place. And it shows the white supremacist papers trying to pull back on it and giving resistance in every way they can. So we cannot, and you can kind of compare it to today. If you're looking at CNN and then you turn over to Fox News, and you will see the quote unquote yin and yang, the push and the pull, in terms of trying to hold onto old precepts, racist precepts in one context, and the other one trying to push us forward into new ideas, a new way of thinking, at least accuracy, at least presenting accuracy. So that's the role that we really see in the media. But in terms of our personal impact, your media is called in one way your rough draft. This is your rough draft of history. What has taken place, and someone is sitting there recording it and put it in the daily news, is not the end all. When George Floyd's murder first took place, that was one aspect, but now we have to follow through that trial. We have to actually see what's going to take place all the way through the trial. So that's a reckoning every day in the media. What took place yesterday? What's going to take place today? What impacted those differences that we are seeing? And what's going to be the outcome? So we're moving towards history, but it's being recorded all the time. And that's one role of the media, is to record history accurately. Sometimes we may not like the way it played out, but we have to be accurate. And that's one of the attributes of Allah, al-Haq. So we take it very seriously that we tell the truth and present the truth, even in our rough draft of history.
Thank you for that. So we're answering now, wanting to hear from you, Okolo, about why this work of in this area of preservation, this work in a museum, why did you go into that? And that was something that you feel is something that's important and significant work for you to be involved in.
Right. So, I learned this later on. I've always been interested in history, but one of the things that Islam says, and the scholars, is that we should study history, study nature, and study oneself, the nature of the human being. So you study the sciences, the natural science, the natural environment, and then you must study history, and then study your own development. And so now I do understand the importance of it, because what it really does, history is, as Aisha said, is that history is like we're on a stage. So it's our work. It's what we're doing in life. You have to look at where you come from in order to understand where you're going. So that history is so important. But really what we're having to do, of course, in terms of preserving the history, we're also having to restore, lost history, correct the narrative, of past history. So I just want, so the important role that I see us playing in the museum is those particular things. But I guess I want to plug it to much of what Aisha talked about earlier, and just kind of bringing all of that history up and bringing it up to the movement today. I want to again reiterate this concept and how important it is in terms of rewriting the narrative, is for us to understand that when we're talking about the African American freedom struggle, we're really not, it's not a way of separating ourselves from others. It's really about really connecting ourselves with others. And what I mean by that is that because of the African Americans' struggle in terms of its enslavement, African people being brought, from their homeland and put into a strange land, you might say, right? I like, there's a quote in the Bible that Imam Muhammad used, and he says, the saying is, would a man steal from God? You have this whole people, right? So I wanted to use that saying that is, it's a well-known quote in the Bible, meaning that would a man steal a whole people? How do you steal a whole people from God, right? You steal a whole people from God when you take them out of their natural environment, right? And you take them to a place and you put them, it's like you're uprooting them, and then you're rerouting them in a place of horror, in a place that, says to them, you have no family ties, you have no God, you have no sense of humanity. You are not connected to humanity, right? So what the African American Muslim movement does, as I said, there's a civil rights movement. That's a movement. That was one path that was on. That was one part of our movement. But the movement for the struggle to restore human dignity, to restore the dignity of the human being, that's the other side of the movement. And when we talk about dignity, what we're talking about is our ability as human beings to connect to that source, that unleashes our human potential. So that's how we define human dignity. It is having an understanding of the inherent nobility, that honor, that worth, that born sense of leadership and self-governance. That is the endowment. It is the inheritance of every human being. But when you separate people from their connection to that, you can't have human dignity without connecting yourself back to the Creator. And so we as a people we were removed from even being looked upon as human beings, as having humanity. So we were considered 2/3 human being. And so I'm saying that, so our work in restoring that history and connecting it to the historical civil rights, historical freedom struggle that has began from the beginning of man. But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is recognized as having been a part. All of the prophets of God, brought this concept and this idea of freedom of religion, but freedom of thought. Being a free human being, right? And so he restored and brought that, and he established that in the first Islamic state. It was the first state established as a free and ideological society that really fostered this importance of religious freedom and human consciousness and connecting yourself to having that freedom of thought and freedom of action, right? And so for us as a people, it was really important, for us to connect to that. And even though we're talking about these two paths, but what we are attempting to do in the work that we're doing in the museum to help to show how we continue to develop on this foundation of preservation of history is that we're using this new evolving research that we've done and really looking at the civil rights movement and the African American Muslim movement as one freedom struggle. As we have done the research and as we look back on it, we're finding that those two movements actually, using Dr. King and his involvement in the movement and his transformation, is that he actually transformed the civil rights movement, the social political thought within the civil rights movement to a religious-based social political thought, right? And Imam Warithuddin Muhammad did the same thing with his transformation of the African American Muslim movement through the Nation of Islam. So we're saying that if you, we're calling on scholars, we're calling on researchers, the media, to really look at that history and seeing how those two movements actually coming together, them emerging and coming into one freedom struggle. They actually represent a new religious-based social justice model that connects us back to that historical freedom movement of all of the prophets of God, all the way to the freedom movement, restoral of the freedom movement that Prophet Muhammad brought, but also connecting us to our current movements like Black Lives Matter, immigrants' rights, indigenous people's rights, and these other fight against Islamophobia. Instead of all of us seeing these movements as separate movements for freedom, justice, and equality, it's only one freedom movement. And so our hope is to utilize this history and utilizing journalism and utilizing this new research that we're calling for, we will be able to bring forth this religious-based social justice model to help us to, in fact, save the soul of America, as the president is saying, is that you're not going to be able to save the soul of America without understanding that historical connection of this social justice movement of freedom, justice, and equality that started from the beginning of man and now, has come face to face. We've come face to face. We're trying to reconcile that in this a new movement or a revival of this freedom struggle.
Sister Akolo, as a follow-up, you talked about dignity, and that meaning like inherent nobility, honor, and self-governance. And I think that's so important to talk about structures and ways of knowing that need to remain, be added on, or be brought back. And the vision of Era Woman is really to amplify the voices and leadership of African American Muslim women, working in partnership with other African American women for advancement, preparation, and protection of the African American community through broad-based engagement. And that's part of our framework, is to really look at those three areas of advancement, protection, and preparation. And under protection is preservation, which we talked about in terms of journalism, in terms of the museum and history. And it was interesting because when you was describing it, I really understood, like, kind of in my soul, what's been happening for me, I know, in the last year. And looking at history, looking at my family history, just African American history, African history, and how it's like, when the word remember, like people say, you got to remember what happened, but it's really like remember, like putting the member back together, right? You always think of remember as here, but really I see remember as like bringing an individual or a community of people back together. And the way you had, just the way you said it, it clicked for me in a different way. But the question being, what structures or ways of knowing should remain? Should we leave behind? Should we leave right now? Because I know a few that we need to leave behind in terms of how we feel about ourselves, and start to remember. So what structure should we remain? Should we let go of, or should be brought back, something we had in the past that we need to remember?
Well, for me, on my part, and I'm sure Aisha will have a added perspective, but let's just think of the primarily the four structures that hold up a society that needs to be reformed and restructured. That's, Dr. Martin Luther King. It's important for us to remember that he talked about a disease that was in the American spirit. And he talked about the fact that America needed to undergo a radical revolution of values and restructuring of its society. So we're talking about these four structures. What structures? And when you're talking about a disease within a nation, in the soul of a nation, that means that their core values need to be, restored, need to be redefined and lived, lived in a way that's going to it's going to play out those beliefs. Okay, so the first one would be the religion. Most people don't understand the important role that religion has played historically and continue to play, but because this society embraced religious ideas, but this society is designed on what we call a secular social thought, right? And so understanding, but now it tells you in our Declaration of Independence, that's why it's important. We're pushing for a narrative change. We're pushing for a narrative change as it relates to this relationship between the secular world and ideas and science and religion. There is an intersectionality that you cannot avoid between a secular science or science and religion, right? And so the importance of religion and restructuring our ideas and what we understand about religion, that needs to be one of those structural changes that needs to take place in terms of the core values, right? So it's like religious literacy. We need to undergo, major training across the board on all of the various different levels of understanding, and better understanding religion. The other one is government. There is an intersectionality between religion and government, right? Our other institution is the cultural institutions. Our cultural institutions, no way you can get around, these integrating this intersectionality. And the last, let's see, government, religion, our economic system, right? So those are the 4 areas: religion, culture, our cultural institutions, government, and economics. So these are all the issues that we're dealing with, right? There's an intersectionality. You can't do one without the other.
Praise be to Allah. I would like to add also to that, in terms of our mother nature, our femininity, our role as women. One thing we must maintain and not let slip away from us is the role of motherhood and the importance of motherhood in the establishment of society. Motherhood is the basis for family, and family is the first building block for your social order, for your society. And in Al-Islam, the Prophet said, paradise lies at the foot of the mother, giving emphasis on how important it is to have the female role within the society and the value that brings forth. And also remember that the mother is the first teacher. No matter how powerful or how high in status the man claims, evolves to, his first teacher was his mother. And that's what George Floyd brought us back to, that primal cry to his mother. It's an intuitive connection that the mother has with her child. And many women would tell you, I know my child's cry. He can be in a nursery with all other babies crying, but your baby's cry. There's that intuitive connection. There's that primal connection of a mother to her child. And we don't want to sever that. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to get so far away from the family connection that we don't have that intuitive nature as mothers. And Sister Okola mentioned freedom, justice, and equality. In the Nation of Islam, that was how we define Al-Islam. Al-Islam is freedom, justice, and equality. And many of the persons who were brought to the forefront, brought to the reminders of what freedom, justice, and equality is, just like Sister Claire Muhammad was the woman. And in the Nation of Islam, the woman had a major role in bringing forth the whole community. Her role was not slighted. She was not the forgotten part of God's creation. God forgot that man needed a mate. But she, in the Quran, is referred to as the soul in the feminine. And from that one soul came countless men and women. So the female influence in the structural organization of society, as well as the advancement of society, is carried forward. And even in those Muslim women examples throughout history, again, we see the role of the intuitive mother, the mother nature throughout the Quran. When we go back to mothers like Moses' mother, who feared for his very existence, and where she had to let go of her fears and put her son onto a path that she wasn't quite sure where he would end up, but she feared for his life so much until she had to put him on the river and then watch that he be picked up by the wife of her enemy. But God brings her back to that child in the story of Moses, and where the mother actually comes back to be the nurse maiden for her very own child. So throughout the scriptures and throughout the chronicle of history, we see the role of the woman unfolding in major ways that only God could inspire. So women have been inspired to make moves even when they really don't understand themselves what path they're about to take. But we see repleted that if you have moved to do something so profoundly and so intensely, then you should accept that that's God inspiring you, and you should move out in the way that you're being inspired. And don't overlook that inspiration. Don't assume that you can't be used by God for profound things that will impact history.
Let me just add very quickly to what Aisha has said. I wanted to plug it into what I talked about when I talked about those four structures. Under what Aisha is presenting, she's talking about the family structure. The family, the institution of family, is a part of that cultural structure, that what the culture of a society is. And not only that, is one other thing that I really wanted to make sure when we're talking about the culture, we're also talking about its educational institutions, right? So education is critically important in the in this restructuring that relative to the question that you asked, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. I actually, going back to something that you said a little bit, well, that you brought out a little bit earlier, Sister Okolo, about the FBI involvement in COINTELPRO and the attacks on the leadership that has happened in the past, and that's something that we're all generations, younger generations are becoming aware of, with things like what was it with the Black Messiah? I think that's what it was called. With
Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yes, with Fred Hampton, and then also Billie Holiday's story came out, and she was being targeted as well, like so many other musicians as well as leaders. And then what we've seen with the protesters here recently is them still being attacked, them still being in prison. So really what I would like to know from both of you all, with your experience, what are some ways that we can protect the work and maintain the integrity of the work that we're doing, but also to protect the workers? What's some advice that you all would give, but also put with that, what's some advice that you would give to Era of Woman and the way that we're choosing to fight in this struggle? Sister Aisha, did you want to take that first? And then Sister Okolo can give a little bit more, because I know she got a good tidbit about that COINTELPRO.
Okay. Well, I think what you're doing is critically important. And that is to document what is taking place in our lives, as well as giving support to those. Many of the workers on the front line couldn't do what they are doing unless they have the support, the background support of many others. So it is crucially important that we support those in the movement, those on the front line, as well as those who are giving resources to those on the front line. The Muslim is not a pacifist. There's the saying of the prophet that when a Muslim sees a wrong, he seeks to correct it with his actions. You have to step out and act against the wrong that you see. And if perchance there's something that's not allowing you to act out physically against the wrong, then you should speak out against it. You should be vocal. You should add your voice to the protest. And if there's something that's preventing you from being vocal, maybe you will lose your job. Maybe you do have children to protect. Maybe there is some physical threat to your very being if you speak out. Then the least of faith, it says, is you should at least feel bad about it in your heart. As if the very thoughts that you have an impact on the outcome of the events that you see unfolding. So the Muslim is again, is not a pacifist. Whatever we see in front of us, we are to interact with on any one of those three levels. And the third level, just feeling bad about it, is the weakest of faith. And it's called faith. It's the weakest of faith. There has been so much contributed to our progress and our well-being until we are obligated to protect those advancements that have been made on our behalf. We cannot let people put all of their livelihood, all of their resources, all of their lives on the line to advance our well-being, and that we not take a role, part into it for ourselves. So going forward, it is incumbent upon us to be in the struggle. And once the struggles that we've gone through, the experiences that we've gone through, from slavery to Jim Crow to just outright oppression and murder, then we're obligated to advance the whole humanity. Our recovery, our advancement is not just for ourselves, but it's for the whole of humanity. And it's that God has given us opportunity to learn from our own experiences and not succumb to them, but to use them for the betterment of the whole humanity.
Alhamdulillah, beautiful. I'll just add a couple of things. One is, now you talked about the COINTELPRO. We can talk a long time about that. But I want to just kind of go right to the question, though. The question is, what can we do to protect the worker and to protect the work, right? And so I'm just going to use what Al-Islam tells us to do. And that is that we are to read, right? When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was agonizing, over, all of the atrocities that was going on in his society, Allah inspired him as the first revelation was to read, right? And Iqra. Now we're saying read, but in Arabic, Iqra is broader than just reading, but it's about educating yourself. It's about holding up education. It is about preserving education, preserving the truth. We're talking about that history. So that's the most important thing, is that in Islam, Prophet Muhammad was called he could be considered the most strategic leader in terms of war strategy, right? Again, we're calling on people to do more research on this history, right? Because one of the things that Allah blessed him to say in this in Quran is that everybody don't go out the same. It's like, yeah, there are some on the front lines. Then those that are not on the front line, you need to be preparing yourself, intellectually, scholarly, making sure that you're preserving and actually helping to increase your understanding of the struggle. And there are some that's going to have to be at the negotiating tables, right? Because we have to understand that this movement that we're talking about, this moment that we're in, it is really just it's a revival of the freedom struggle. It's just this one freedom struggle. So, and every time such a thing has happened in history, if you're not careful, if you're not on, understanding and doing the education and educating yourself and establishing education, and the critical part of that is also calling people to their source of strength. Okay, so it's education, calling people to their source of strength. And what is a source of strength? We're saying it's a restore of your sense of inner dignity, right? Connecting yourself back to the Creator. And we're calling it freedom of religion. We're putting forward a new narrative. We want to really reframe the narrative in terms of how we see freedom of religion in this country, but we want to enhance that meaning. In this country, the idea of freedom of religion is that anybody is free to practice any religion any way they want. We are not to trample on that, right? But in Al-Islam, and we feel like that idea of freedom of religion was actually borrowed from the Prophet Muhammad and that movement. And history is telling us that as we look back, the research that we've done. But in Islam, it was freedom of religion is making sure that every individual understand that they was created by a creator and they have direct access to that creator. And they were created with dignity, which is what I defined earlier. They were created with these inherent, nobility, honor, worth, a born sense of leadership and self-governance. They're already deposited in the human being. So that's how you protect the human being, is that you gotta connect them back to that source. And that's what those that seek to control us, and that's what's happening now, is that's why we're, we all feel like we're enslaved. We got 1% or 10% that got 90% of all the wealth, because we're not nurturing within that human being, right? That idea of their worth and really protecting that. So protecting the individual by reconnecting them to that source and education and remembering that history, right?
Yes, you all have touched on so much, and really have touched on what we're here for right now, and embarking upon this era of woman, that we just talked about, EOW, and what we're seeking to do in this. And I'm so happy to have you, Sister Aisha, Mustafa, and you, Sister Okola, engaged in this movement that we are, that is, inshallah, God willing, taking place. And really, you just spoke about how we have this need for preserving ourselves and preserving education and connecting to our source of strength and all of that. And even mentioning those 4 structures too, religion, government, culture, and economics. Those are things, and these are topics that we are seeking right now in Era of the Woman, to have other women gather around as we want to dive into these topics, dive into these issues, these concerns that we see in our communities, and that we are wanting to actually take action and do something about these things and get on the other side of it, not just being reactionary, but we are now wanting to put in place now structures to effectively changing the narratives, but then effectively changing the systemic racism and the systemic issues that are plaguing our communities, the African American communities, for so long. So that is where we are at right now, as we are now about to take place, embarking upon our climb to the summit. And as we are climbing to the summit, and you're kind of like, well, what's at the summit? Well, the summit is going to be this really just paramount gathering and convening of other like-minded powerhouse leaders, formally and informally. sometimes, we as women, we sometimes may shy away from things that we very much have expertise in and that we do really well, but because it's not seen as the conventional type of leadership role, we may not think that it is a strength or something in which that can be added into the conversation or to be a contribution. But right now we are literally putting the call out for all women who are wanting to get involved in this type of work, who are wanting to continue to walk in those shoes. As Sister Aisha Mustafa mentioned, these giants of women who have led the way for us, and that we are still walking in the paths in which they have trailblazed. So if you are looking to hear more about Era of the Woman, as we are now climbing to that big convening, we will be providing more programs like today, more discussions centered around one, getting us educated, again, de-educating us from, some of the colonized education we've had in the past, or disruptions we've had, as we talked about COINTELPRO and things like that. But we are now seeking to rebuild and reconnect to the source of strength. And at this time, Tiffany can also tell you how you can, as Sister Aisha Mustafa mentioned, how you can be of support and be that background support or frontline support with Era of the Woman.
Sure. So the best way to get involved is to go to our website, Era of Woman, WOMAN.com, and join us as a member. And you'll see there are events too. So I think the first Sunday of each month, we have what we call the Maida, which is the table in Arabic, meaning we want all the women to come to the table to create relationships, to build, because we often use that term African American community, but it actually doesn't exist in the US anymore. There really isn't an African American community. If you look at the definition of what community means, we're really disconnected, and we have to reconnect together in order to meet each other, know each other. We're all over the place. Many of us don't even live in predominantly Black neighborhoods anymore, right? So we have to first reconnect, build those relationships. So that's what we do on those first Sundays. We come together at the table and we have conversations. We go into breakout rooms and we get to know one another. But you can also join as a member. It's $10 a month. That contribution will help us to fulfill the financial needs of our programming, doing events like this. We're going to be doing leadership trainings. I mean, really, that's what the Maidas are. They're coming to the table. Part of this is, history, leadership training. It's not, it's not always leadership the way, as Cecilia said, it's not always the leadership that's formal. It's the informal. We want to help empower women. We've empowered each other the last 9 months just to get to this place where we can be here on this webinar. It's been a lot of work, and a lot of self-discovery. So we need you to join us in this work.
Just want to thank everyone for viewing this program, and if you are liking what you're hearing today and you're appreciating what we shared, please comment, like, and share it. Visit eraofwoman.com for more information about that. And as well as we are going into Islamic Heritage Month for the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. So Savannah, would you like to talk a little bit more about what's to come in next month and where they can tune into more programs from the International Museum of Muslim Cultures?
Sure, I definitely can. So this is going to be the first sort of soft event of Islamic Heritage Month, but we did do a slight shift with our dates, so stay tuned. If you go to www.muslimmuseum.org, you'll be able to keep up with the schedule. You'll be able to go to our events tab and then go to Islamic Heritage Month, and you'll get a full schedule of all of the virtual events that we have coming up. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And Sister Aisha Mustafa, what is next with the Muslim Journal? Anything we should be looking out for from there?
Praise be to Allah. The Muslim Journal, we are going to advance more with our online production. This pandemic has made us realize that we would do it eventually, but eventually is now. So we have an online editor, Sultana Whitfield, out of, she's one of, we call her our legacy babies, 40 something years old, out of Newark. Her family came through the Nation of Islam, and she's going to be the online editor. And we are advancing the Muslim Journal online, and we will be launching a new site within the month. So we look forward to that. And remember that the first editor when Imam Muhammad took leadership was Anna Kareem, another Muslim sister who helped transition the renowned Muhammad Speaks newspaper into the Bilalian News and into the Muslim Journal that we know today.
Wow, thank you. And we say her name. And also for you all to put in the chat as well, when you see this program, anybody else you would like to hear from, that you would like to see on a webinar within the Era of the Woman. Put their names in the chat so that we can know and we can invite them on. Maybe you'll see them coming up in the next episode or next session that we may have. All right, so thank you so much for attending. This has been a really just amazing conversation, really just hearing from you all. I don't know so much as what we had to contribute to you, but you all definitely contributed so much to us as we are really just starting out in this work that you all have been moving forward in for a long time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sister Kolo and Sister Aisha. I mean, we definitely sit at your feet, and we honor your continued contributions to advance, protect, preserve the African American community. And I just want to just say thank you to both of you, and yeah, reiterate totally. We want to hear in the comments who everybody wants to hear from, and bring them to the table.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you all for stepping up and taking the mantle and moving forward with it, because that's also the generations coming. They are very important, and we're waiting for you to carry this work forward. And it means naught if it falls on deaf ears or there's no one to take the inheritance. Your religion, your community, all that we've done is your inheritance for you to own it and carry it forward. We appreciate you.
Yes, I saw like yes, I as well would like to echo Aisha to say that we are really so inspired, really, by the work that you all are doing, and we are behind you, and we want to lift this work up. And please call on us anytime, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everybody.